hours, the division says we have to spend 4 hours out of the 12 hours on the REPC. So last week, Rob did the first part of the first 2 hours of that, and then we'll cover the next 2 hours of it today. Now, on that, I know we had some issues with some of the people getting onto Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Come on in.
Oh, yeah, I had a very hard time getting on this last week.
Yeah, I know you did. Right. So anyway, apologize for those that had issues with that. But
So do we get credit? Did it go through or?
no,
No.
no. Nice try. All right. So here's the sign-in sheet and the packets we're gonna use for class today. All right, so anyway, so Rob spent a bunch of time with you guys last week on the REPC. Hopefully that was some good information. I know he usually spends like the first hour on Earnest Money. Did that happen again?
Yeah.
So
Big thing for him.
it's what?
It's a big thing.
Yeah, well, and the reason for that actually is that most of the time, that's the thing that tends to get people in the most trouble is the earnest money. So that's why he spends so much time on that. So today's not going to be that. So meaning last week, Rob kind of went through each of the sections and talked about them. Today's going to be more about how do you fill it out. Now, it's not that there's like only one way to fill it out, but I'm going to go through and just talk with you guys and help you to understand some of the hangups and some of the areas that people do get a little caught up on it. So hopefully you guys that are on Zoom, I sent on the email an attachment as well. So for you guys that are on Zoom, hopefully you have it and have printed it out. Everybody else here should have one of the printouts. So here's what we're going to do now. So for the next 15-ish minutes or however long it takes to get through it, what I have given to you guys in this packet is on the front page is a made up MLS property. And then this REPC that's the next pages afterwards is the as if somebody had written an offer on this listing. Does that make sense? So what I want you guys to do, and there's a lot of errors. So what I want you to do for the next, like I said, 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes, however long it takes for you guys to go through it. I want you to go through each of the places that you would have filled out and see if you can find the errors that were made on this contract. And then what we're going to do is we'll spend then the rest of the class going through and talking about, okay, how do you now fill it out? Now, here's why. The reason why we're going to do this is what I have found is that most people who get their real estate license, and I've shared this before, but I'm going to say it again. 13 out of 14 people who get their real estate license will be gone out of the business within 2 years. And the reason that happens is because when you went to real estate school, did they teach you how to really sell real estate? No. What did they teach you?
How not lose all your money.
Stay out of jail.
Yeah, how to stay out of jail, right? Basically, they taught you how to pass the test is really what they taught you. And so what I found is that then people get their license, they now go to work, and if they come across somebody that wants to actually buy a house, and it's time to now fill out the contract, the agents then feel like, okay, but now I don't know how to do it. What if I do it wrong or whatever? So here's the idea for me is I want to relieve as much of that as we can today, going through then talking about, okay, what do you put on each of the lines and what do they mean and how do you protect the client and those type of things, okay? So here's what I want you to do. So spend the next 10 or 15 minutes, however long it is, going through looking at that. So you may want to just rip that first page off and then use that as kind of that way you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. I mean, unless you want to, it's fine too. But go through and find the errors that were made throughout that contract, and then we'll go through and talk about it. So, and Jill, if you can turn your camera on, unfortunately, I can't give you credit for the CE if the camera's not on, the division says we have to have it on, so. There you go, awesome, thank you. We're taking this, and we're gonna go through this contract to see what mistakes were made. This is pretty- if you don't, it's- it's- it's about this one, if you don't, if you can get your license, you can pay it.
Yeah.
Hey Trevor, need you to turn your camera on if you're gonna be on Zoom, but. Oh, he said his laptop's trying. Here you are, Trevor, can you see you? So for you guys on Zoom, when you're done, if you'll just throw in the chat box and let me know, and then once you guys hear, I'm kind of keeping an eye on what pages and stuff you're on. But once you're done, let me know.
Wait, so you're telling me I'm supposed to be filling something out right now?
Yeah, I sent you, in the email I sent you yesterday, Trevor, there should be an attachment that had, and you don't need to fill it out, but just look through. Let's see.
Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you.
So you're gonna go through that and find any of the mistakes that are on the filled out portion. So Bronson, I'll try to throw it in the chat box for you. Are you on a computer or a phone? Oh, okay. On the phone, if I do an attachment, it won't come through, so. I guess I'll just scroll on the page here and you can see if you can find them this way. Two more minutes. I should have been scrolling for these guys online. It's a lot sooner though. But that's okay. We'll go through the cover. All right, we ready to do this?
Oh, yeah.
All right. let me get- Scroll back up here. All right, so. You guys lights on or off?
Off.
Better? Good. James is like, I sleep better when they're on. All right. Okay, so here's how we're gonna do this. So we're just gonna go through, so in fact, actually, let me back up. My plan is to go through and just talk about the filled in parts of the contract. But if you have questions about other sections of it, then let's stop and talk about it for a minute and answer whatever questions you have. Okay, so the first thing that we have on here, and the first thing that I guess I want to point out to you guys is notice at the top right here, this says, this is a legally binding real estate purchase contract. So just kind of keep in mind that a lot of times people will enter into the contract not really stopping to think about, this is a legal document that they're signing, and once we come to an agreement on it, we've got consequences that are also associated with it. Meaning sometimes people, we changed our mind, we don't want to buy it anymore, but give us our earnest money back. And if the contract says yes, then great, but if it doesn't, then they're not going to get the earnest money back. Okay. All right. So we get down here on this 9th day of October 2017. So any concerns that you guys have with that, other than the fact that it's a long time ago, but beyond that?
I mean, I don't know if we're trying to get too particular, but it said it was listed in 2015. I don't know if if that was a mistake we were supposed to catch.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, you've
Yeah.
just been using the same package.
Yeah, I've just been using it for a long time.
Okay.
So yeah, no, but yeah, good catch on that, but no, that's not it. Okay, so here's the main thing that I want to point out and make sure that you guys understand on this. Not so much am I worried about the date that's there, but here's the key piece. Right here, notice in parentheses, it says offer reference date. So whatever date you put in there is anywhere else in the contract. Basically what this is saying is anywhere else in the contract that it mentions offer reference date, it is all referring back to that date. So when we do an addendum, and we'll get to one later on here, anytime you're going to do an addendum to this purchase contract, on the addendum or the counter offer, either way that you're doing it, it will ask for the offer reference date of the purchase contract. It's whatever date you put in, right? Excuse me. So whatever date you're going to put in right there is from then on, anywhere it references the offer reference date is that date. The reason I bring that up is because maybe I filled this out on the 9th of October, but maybe the buyer didn't sign it until the 10th of October. And a lot of times people will end up putting the 10th of October as the offer reference date, when in actuality, it's the 9th based on what this says here. Sorry.
It doesn't matter when it gets signed.
Doesn't matter when it gets signed. This is the offer reference date.
Okay.
I don't know what is going on. I ran outside today, which is the first time over the winter that I have, and I don't know if I got stuff in my lungs from running or what. Yeah.
It's COVID.
Yeah.
You're a little late, Trevor.
You got an echo in here.
Yeah, Douglas already said that. But we still laughed. So thanks, Trevor. All right. All right, so next then, next line, it's got Billy Bob Buyer. Any concerns there?
Is it more than one buyer? Is it a couple? Is it whatever's on the title?
Okay, good. So this is what I want to talk about. So you say you say whoever's on the title,
Yeah.
but on the buyer, is there anyone on the title yet? Not yet, right? Because
True.
so this is who's going to go on
Who's
to
gonna go
title.
on the
The
title?
person getting the loan.
Okay, good. So
Okay.
say that again, Trevor. What should be on that line?
The person bringing in, like, or qualifying for the loan or bringing in the cash offer with their proof of funds in a bank account.
Good. So the person or people who are going to be on the loan is the name that should go there. Now, what if though his name really is William Robert?
You got a problem.
Okay, so what name should we put on there?
Is legal on the driver's license.
Okay,
The Navy's getting them all.
so good. That's how you want to think about it is however the name is on how they've applied for the loan is what name you want to put on there. So meaning if he's applying for the loan as Billy Bob, then great. But if he's applying for the loan as William Robert, then we want the name on here to be William Robert. Now, the reason for that is, let me give you kind of the background. You go back in time to 2007, 2008, all of a sudden the market's crashed. There's tons and tons of homes being foreclosed on. Well, when that happens, anytime that happens, that there are a bunch of foreclosures that are going on, nobody wants to lose money, right? I mean, anybody here like to lose money? So the banks don't like to either. So what happens then is when somebody defaults on a loan, the lender is going to then try to recoup as much money of that as they can. And what they will then do, or what they do now, I don't know how much they did it then, but what they do now is if they can go back to the loan originator, so whoever originated the loan, so for example, in Spiro here, let's say that they originate a loan and then it gets sold off to some servicer or some other company. If that buyer then ever defaults on that loan, that lender is going to try to come back to Inspiro to say, hey, you guys did something wrong, therefore you have to take the loss. You give us the money and it's you end up with the loss, not us. Well, one of the areas they will do that is based on the name. If so, for example, if he really applied for the loan as William Robert, but the contract says Billy Bob, that would be a scenario that they could come back to the loan originator and say, you messed up on this loan. You did the contract in the wrong name for who the buyer really was. Therefore, now you get to take the loss on the property. So as a result of that, a lot of times underwriters, if they catch that, if they saw that the loan was applied for as William Robert and they see this, they're going to come back and say to you, we need you to do an addendum to fix it. So that's the other thing that I want to point out to you is just remember any of this stuff that we go through and talk about can always be fixed by an addendum. So don't stress too much about it, meaning I would never hold off on writing an offer for a buyer because, well, I got to find out first how they applied for the loan. I mean, yes, you should, but in the event that I can't find out for whatever reason, go ahead and write the offer. Just know you might have to do an addendum later on to clean it up. And that's going to be okay. It's just as we go through this, I'm going to try to help you so you don't have to do a bunch of addendums. Because part of what you're going to see is you're going to have listings that other agents write an offer to send to your seller, and you're going to get it, and it's going to be a mess that then you'll take an addendum and go through and clean it up by fixing it all on an addendum. I'm just trying to help you to not be that person so that you're not having all these mistakes. So ideally,
Getting that video from freaking not Matt Barton anymore, but Rob Oakey telling you everything you did wrong.
that's right. Yeah, thank you. So anyway, so that's what we want to do on this. So we want to have the buyer's name here to match how they've applied for the loan. If they haven't applied for the loan, then just ask them when you go and apply, what's the name you would be applying for the loan in? Make sense? Okay, good. Next, seller, Sally Sue seller. Any concerns there? Okay, so now here's then the question. Where do I get that? How do I find out who the seller is? Okay, tax records. Okay, good. Now, here's the thing though. When you go to the county records, just know that most of the time they're right, but they're not always right. Okay, so you always want to verify is basically what I'm saying is. So for me, I always am going to call the listing agent before I send over an offer, which you should have that be one of the practices for you as well. You should always be calling the listing agent before you're going to send over an offer. And we'll talk about, there's a number of things that you want to ask them, but one of them is, hey, what's the name I should put in there for the seller? Now, if they've put it on the MLS and it's got the owner and it has the names there, then you're probably good with using that they've put in there. Most of the time, again, it is going to be okay to use the county records, but just know that it's not 100% accurate. So let me give you a quick story that we had a number of years ago that an agent went out and listed a property. He went to the tax records, got who the seller was, went out and met with the seller, had them sign the contract. Tim submitted it to the office. We got it put on the MLS. The market was somewhat like it is now, meaning it was moving pretty fast. And so they immediately had gotten an offer. Well, in the process of then negotiating the offer, the listing agent got a call from the title company and said, hey, as we're pulling the preliminary title report, so let me pause real quick. As soon as you list a property, you want to order that preliminary title report. So I don't know if Jason mentioned that to you guys last week or not, but if not, anytime, as soon as you list the property, order that preliminary title report right away. And we want to do that because we want to verify who the seller is. So this agent gets a call from the title company and says, hey, the seller, there's another name on the title besides just the one you had. So the agent then calls me and says, okay, what do I do? So if you get that, what would you do? What do we need to do? Yeah, we've got to go get them to actually, whoever that person is, we had to get them to sign the listing agreement, and we needed to have them added as the seller on here.
You need to do an addendum for all that, right?
Yeah, so so I told the agent, you need to go get whoever that is first, call up your seller and ask them who that is. Then from there, you need to get their signature on the listing agreement, but we're also going to need it on this offer that you're in the process of negotiating. They go and call the seller, and the seller says, oh, that's my mom. And the agent says, great, well, I need your mom's signature. Oh, well, she's on a cruise, so she's not available. Okay, well, when will she be back? In a week. Great. So now what do we need to do, though? We're in the middle of negotiating this offer.
Everything changes, the
Delay.
due
What did we do or what
diligence
should
day.
they?
Yeah, what should they do?
I might cry.
What'd you say, Trevor?
You might cry.
Okay, so here's what I said. You need to go get a signature, but since you're in the process of negotiating an offer and we aren't going to be able to get her signature, do an addendum to this contract that says that it's subject to whatever the lady's name was, the mom signing that contract when she got back off of the cruise. So they did, negotiated it, came to an agreement, and a week goes by and the agent calls and says, hey, I need to get your mom's signature. Oh, well, she went on another cruise. So she left and jumped on another one for another week, which all of a sudden now is a little bit suspicious of what is that
Yeah.
real? I mean,
Yeah.
there are some people that do that. I have a sister-in-law that every year does that, goes on 2 cruises back to back, but a little suspicious. So what ends up happening then is another week goes by, he calls and says, oh, she should be back any day. Well, a couple days go by, finally gets a hold of the mom, calls up the mom, says, I need to come get your signature on the listing agreement, and I need to go over the purchase contract and have you sign it. And she says, absolutely not. We're not selling the property. And she said, the whole reason I'm on title, so initially she wasn't, she had herself added to title, is because she said, I bought the house. The mom had bought the house for her son. She said, he tried to sell it once before without my permission, and I got involved, stopped it, added myself. So now she's mad at us for pursuing this without it. So my point in all of that is trust what's on the county records, but verify. Okay. So I just always ask the listing agent, who do you want me to put as the name of the seller? Like I said, if it's already on the MLS under the owner section, you're probably good to use what they put there, but always you want to verify. Okay. So you'll order the preliminary title report. Okay. Next, earnest money. Now I know you guys already spent a ton of time, so we won't do a lot on this, but $1,000 earnest money in the form of personal check number 567. Any concerns there?
It's very specific. I'm gonna usually just put personal check,
Okay,
but
that works. Any other thoughts? Comments? Okay, so here's why I did that. Now, times have changed a bit, but when I first got my license, the way my broker trained me is to always put the check number in there. And here's why, is typically what would happen is we weren't doing things electronically back then. We would sit down with the client in a conference room and write out the contract. when I got to that section, I would always say to the buyer, how are you gonna pay for this? Where's the earnest money gonna come from? Well, we're gonna write a check. Okay, and then I would say to them, what's the check number? And they would then have to go look it up, which they would usually then fill out the earnest money check at that same point. They would fill out the earnest money check and then hand it to me. So the reason I always did that was it was kind of a subtle way of getting them to fill out the earnest money check and handing it to me right away. In today's market though, where we are doing it typically electronically, you may want to use Earnest or one of those using an online thing. So it doesn't really matter. I guess here's the point, what you put in the form of, but whatever it is that they're giving you, put it on that line. If they're doing it through Earnest, then you can put it on there. If they're giving you a check, then put check. If it's a money order, it's a money order. So the one thing we won't accept is cash. So if somebody does want to give you cash, send them down to 7-Eleven or something to get a money order. So we don't want cash. Yeah.
Learn that.
Did you?
Mobile home deal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So no cash. We don't want that.
So you just do like cashier's check.
Yep. Whatever it is. If it's a cashier's check, if it's a money order. So just whatever it is, you're just going to put that. I got to remember the people on Zoom. I got to keep pointing with this. So anyway. All right. Next. And like I say, if you have questions on anything else, stop me and talk. So next, property. 123 Easy Street. Any concern there? Okay. What about the city, the county, the zip, tax ID number? Any concerns there? Okay. So,
Do you need to do the coordinates? Should you do north, south, or southwest?
no, I mean, you can if you want to, but you don't necessarily need to. So this one is another one though, that let me just kind of say on this. I have seen scenarios where the house is on a corner lot. And maybe the house, the way the address is that you have it listed on the MLS, the post office may have it actually different because of it being on a corner lot. And so again, this is going to be something that an underwriter is going to want to make sure of, because it's tied back to, again, if it was different that way and this loan goes bad, that's how the lender is going to come back on the service or the originator to say, you guys messed up. So don't be surprised on a corner lot if that doesn't. I've only seen it a few times, but don't be surprised if that were to happen. And again, don't stress about it, but just know you may have to do an addendum to fix it. Okay. All right. Any other questions? What about section 1.2? Any concerns there?
No, refrigerators excluded.
Okay. Steve's saying the refrigerator's excluded. Is that a problem?
Not if they accept it.
Okay, good. So, all right. So here's the key thing. And so here's the point of why I want to talk about this is a couple reasons. Just remember the MLS is an offering. What the MLS says is what a seller is offering out to the buyers. And on the MLS, it says the refrigerators will be excluded. So if we've checked the boxes there, that means, and it basically is what Trevor just said, if this gets accepted, it doesn't matter what the MLS said, it matters what the contract says. But I want to just, the reason I put this on here and do it this way is to point out to you guys, there are a lot of agents out there who would argue that would come back and say, oh, no, the MLS said that the refrigerators were excluded. But if the contract says they're included, then what?
It's included.
Yeah, and because remember, this is a legally binding agreement. Is the MLS a legally binding agreement? No.
Yes, between the brokers.
Well, yes, but between the buyer and the seller, the MLS is not a legally binding anything unless the only time that it would be is and don't do this, but years ago, what people would do is check the other box on here in section 1.2, and then they would write in here MLS number, whatever, and they would attach a copy of the MLS, which would then kind of bring it into being part of the contract. Not the advisable way to do it. Instead, just let the contract speak for itself, basically. So anyway, the other thing to point out, notice that it says refrigerators, there's an S at the end. Occasionally what will happen is you'll go to list a seller's home and the seller will say, yeah, we're going to include the refrigerator that's in the garage or the basement or whatever, but the one that's in the kitchen right now, we're taking with us. Well, according to this contract, what does it say?
They get all.
All of them. So just keep that in mind that there's an S at the end of washers, dryers, refrigerators, microwave ovens, everything. So like a perfect example that at my house, we've got the microwave in the kitchen, but then there's one down in the kitchenette in the basement, which if I wasn't thinking about this if I had sold my house and I was packing it up and I wasn't thinking about microwave ovens, I would pack up that microwave oven and take it with me when I left. But according to the contract, if the box was checked, even that one that's just sitting on counter should be included as well. Does that make sense? Okay.
Where would we list the hot tub?
Yeah.
If they wanted to keep it, it should be listed up there, but
So yeah, no, you would check the other box
Right.
and then write in hot tub.
so. I don't know, the fact that it's not listed on here, whether they want to exclude it or keep it.
Good. Yeah,
that
good
is-
catch.
is a problem.
Yep, good catch. So here's the thing on that. So that brings up a good point. So the MLS list that it's being included, we don't have it in here at all. So what happens?
Real estate agent keeps it.
Is it considered personal property?
Or it's already attached to the.
I mean, it kind of just depends on where it is, on if it would be considered personal property or a fixture. I don't know.
We need to
So,
specify that.
Wow.
yeah, so, yeah, for sure, that's the best thing. But if it's listed in the MLS says included, we don't list it in here.
It's not included.
So very likely, so here's the point, very likely the seller's gonna leave it because they put it in the MLS. But what if they don't? What if they do take it because we didn't list it here?
The agent's buying a hot tub.
That's probably what's gonna happen is the agent's gonna, yeah, so that, back to the refrigerator point, that is my whole thing of what I want you guys to take away from this discussion right here is if it's listed up here, which actually Douglas texted me while you guys were looking at this stuff, you want to talk about what you said? to me?
Yeah, well, this other agent's been a nightmare the whole time. But they had speakers in the basement, and I have pictures from my client when we looked at the property. And from when they then took keys and moved in, and they took all the
Surround
surround sounds wall attached speakers that were in the house. And so I just texted the agent and said, hey, like, you guys need to bring those back because they're included. And she won't text me back.
Of course. Yeah, so right here in section 1.1, it shows
Which is updated,
all wall and ceiling mounted speakers.
however long ago when they did the update to the REPC, they included all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because it was such an issue.
Yep.
Between the TV and all.
So similar to that, it says in 1.1 that it includes ranges, but on the MLS it says it's excluded, so would you have to specifically say under 1.3 excluded items that you're excluding the range?
Yep, so yeah, good question. So that would be the next thing is down here at section 1.3. But let's hold that for one sec, because let me finish off 1.2. So any other concerns in 1.2? There should be one more.
Are not.
Yeah. Right here, this R or R not, we need to address one or the other of those, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So now let's go to section 1.3. So on section 1.3 excluded items. So what Bowen's saying is right on. So in section 1.1, it says the range is going to be included. If we, or even let's use the refrigerator, but if it's going to be excluded, you should write it on the line to make sure in section 1.3
Yeah.
so that nobody has any questions as to if it's excluded.
Because then it would just be an interpretation that would have to go to court, correct?
Yeah.
It would just, the judge would decide.
Yeah, essentially. So let's go back to the hot tub. If
Just when it's in neither section.
Yeah, so where the hot tub, they said on the MLS included, but then it's not listed anywhere here. That would be a scenario that it's kind of like, well, is it or isn't it? And so to me, just that's one of those things. Here's how I usually say it. So let's use the hot tub as the example. Let's say that the buyer sees that it's included, but is like, we don't really care if we have it or not. And maybe a hot tub's not a good example, but a swing set or a trampoline or something in the backyard. Maybe they don't care if they get it or not. Then you could just leave it unspecified and whatever happens, happens. You know, if your buyer's okay with that. But let's say that there's a trampoline and or a swing set or something, and they want to make sure we don't want it. We want it gone. Then I would say for sure list it in the excluded items. Make sure so same thing with that hot tub. If they do not want it, list it
Just remove it.
as excluded.
So what if they have like two refrigerators, like one downstairs and upstairs, and they only wanna leave the one downstairs? So they will have to do the check on the refrigerators, and they will have to exclude it on 1.3.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna repeat so that the people on Zoom make sure they heard what you asked. So if they had two refrigerators, one in the basement and one in the kitchen, and they wanna leave one but take one, yes, then I would click the box other here on section 1.2, check the other box and specify which one's included. And then down in the excluded, specify the one excluded. Yep. But again, if I'm representing the buyer, and I'm just gonna always ask the buyer, if the buyer's like, I don't really care, if they leave it, great, if they take it, then I probably wouldn't specify it necessarily. But if they specifically want something included or they specifically want something excluded, I'm gonna list it in one or the other, just so that there's no question. So the other type of things where we'll see stuff like that is like a shelf or something that's on the wall that the buyer then falls in love with. Oh, that's a cute shelf. I want the shelf too. Ask for the shelf, or
Right.
list it there, ask them for it. Okay. All right. Any concerns in section 1.4, water service? Okay, so here's the thing that I just want to point out for that section. In section 1.4, make sure that what you're remembering on this is the purchase price for the property shall include, so keywords, shall include all water shares, water rights, or shares, if any, that are a legal source of the seller's current culinary water service and irrigation water service, if any, to the property. Okay. So anytime, what this contract is saying is if there are water shares or water rights that are a part of the property, they're automatically included. So if you have a seller that has them and doesn't want to include them, you got to watch for this. So similar to back what Joan was saying up here, which I forgot to finish, is in sections 1.2 or 3 there. If you don't specify it and one of the clients thinks something's happening that's not happening for whatever reason, like, the MLS said they were going to include it, but you didn't put the hot tub on here and the seller now took it with them. Like a lot of times, technically it's not your problem if that happens, but it kind of becomes your problem because you should have specified it. So a lot of times you'll end up paying for that kind of stuff. So which is kind of what Joe was. All right. Any questions on that water service area? Does it make sense? Just make sure, typically if you're just in a normal neighborhood, you're probably not going to have any water shares or water rights, but not a bad idea to always ask about it to see. And then if they are, is the seller wanting to include them or exclude them? And if they are, just make sure you are checking this. A lot of times what happens as listing agents, we get an offer in, and what's the first thing you want to look at when you get an offer?
Purchase price.
Yeah, because you want to see, all right, is the seller going to accept? Then what's the second thing you look at?
Earnest Money.
Dates.
The dates
Oh, yeah.
usually.
Oh.
And why are you looking at the dates, Trevor?
Well, you need to know when to accept it and or if it fits like the timeline your seller needs.
Oh, that's not what I expected you to say. I thought you were gonna say, because you want to find out when you're gonna get paid. So usually it's, we want to see the price to make sure, yes, is the seller gonna accept it? So, but don't forget to look at this other stuff along the way, because I have seen a lot of times agents get themselves in trouble because all they looked at was the price and the dates and, all right, let's do this. And they miss out on stuff that then ends up costing you money because you messed up on the refrigerator. All right, section 2.1, any concerns there?
It's wrong.
Just like I did.
Well, the additional earnest money isn't put there.
Well, they did the math wrong. It should be 248,000 purchase price, or take 1,000 off balance and purchase in cash, or 1,000 off the loan.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So notice it doesn't add up right now. What I have seen a lot of people do, and not as much recently, but what I've seen a lot of people do is they'll put in the $1,000 earnest money here. And then new loan amount, they put TBD, and the balance of the purchase price and cash at settlement, they put TBD. Now, which, by the way, let me just say this in case anybody, almost always somebody's thinking this, even if they don't ask it, is where do you put the down payment? The down payment is E, the balance of the purchase price in cash at settlement. So it used to be, every time I taught this class, somebody would say, so where do you put the down payment? So I just now preempt it so that.
So if someone, is it sufficient to put 3% literally, or does it have to be the dollar amount? Because it does say in cash.
So good question. I would put the dollar amount exactly, rather
I've gotten
than
a lot
putting.
of offers on my listings that have the percentages.
Yeah, and mostly when that happens, when people are putting TBD or a percentage, it's the agents just being lazy, is really what it
Or
is.
they're trying to hide it.
Or it could be trying to hide it as well. But here's what I've found though, is I have had scenarios on properties where the seller ended up accepting an offer because of the amount that the person was putting down on the property. So let me give you actually a quick example. Property up on South Mountain. So I used to do a lot of bank-owned foreclosure properties, so I would help the bank in getting these properties sold. The list price on this particular property was $700,000. We get 2 cash offers, but let me take that back. We didn't know the one was cash. I got 1 cash offer, the other one put into TBD. And so one said cash, showed the whole thing was in cash, the other said TBD. We ended up, everything else was essentially identical, except for that. So the bank asked me, well, what should we do? And I said, well, this one's actually cash. The other one, I don't know what they're doing. So it's your call, but I would say, let's take the cash. So they accepted the cash offer. And then later on, the other agent called me, because long story, but when this property closed, it ended up actually selling for less than what we had initially agreed to. So to kind of give you the story, I get 2 offers. They're both for the exact same amount of money. Bank accepts this one. During the buyer's due diligence, though, we found out all these problems with the property. And the banks typically are not going to go fix anything. But if there are things that are uncovered that weren't visible, you wouldn't know about, then typically the bank will work with you on a price. Now, if it's something that was clear, that like, for example, on this one, home was in the middle of being built when it got foreclosed on. So like there wasn't a front door. So if the buyer would have tried to come back later on and said, hey, we need you to reduce the price because there's not a front door, the bank would have said, you knew there wasn't a front door when you made the offer. Like, so that's not going to work. But if you uncover stuff, which what had happened actually on this one is the builder had done something wrong on the trusses for, not the roof trusses, but like for the floor trusses, where they were supposed to fit inside the walls, but he had they were too long. So he just set them on top of the wall. And so that then kind of threw off everything else that was going to take place. Well, so the buyer found the architect who had drawn these plans for this home, because this was a custom home up on South Mountain, found the architect who had drawn it, figured out all these problems. So we go back to the bank. The bank says, we'll just reduce the price. And I don't remember how much it was, but quite a bit to make it happen. Well, so now we close. And when it closes, the agent whose offer didn't get accepted then calls me up as the listing agent and says, hey, we offered significantly more. Why did we not get the house? And which I ended up double ending the other one too. I had the buyer on both. So yeah, but of course, that's where now the agent who was also the buyer is now calling, basically blaming me and yeah, did I have an input on it? Yes, but what it boiled down to is, and I told the agent, you didn't put on here how much you were putting down and if you were getting a loan. Well, I was doing all cash. Well, then you should have listed it that way
Yeah.
because the bank chose to go with the other offer because of it. Now, the other thing, total side note, that agent tried to say, oh, I knew of those problems and I made my offer accordingly. But there is no way, without talking to the architect, you would have known that. So anyway, my whole point in this is fill it out properly. Make sure you're getting the information and taking the time to fill it out because especially in today's market again, it could make a difference of your offer getting accepted based on the amount of money you're putting down there. Okay. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is they can change that at their own discretion too. So just keep in mind, whatever you put down here, the buyer's not bound to that because the contract says that the buyer can change that however they want to between them and the lender.
Wow.
So
Because there's a section in there, I don't remember exactly where it is, but they have the option to like back out if the financing isn't what they want it to be.
correct. Yeah, which we'll get to that section in a minute. But as part of that, it says that the buyer or the lender can modify either the loan amount or the down payment basically to whatever they feel like they want to do.
So if they were saying they were gonna pay half of it, all in cash, but then decided to go 3% FHA.
If they decided to go FHA, they could switch and do that.
Wow. I don't know.
Now, the only caveat to that is if they decided to switch and do FHA, what do we also now need?
FHA, yeah.
You need that FHA addendum, which
They'll have to agree to it.
the seller's gonna have to agree to. So if they were changing on that one, but if they just said, hey, we're switching from a 50% down to a conventional 3% down. So, okay. All right. The other thing on this one, just to point out, is they've checked is not here, but in the event that somebody checks is, then it also says that you will attach the subject to the sale of the buyer's property addendum as well. Okay, so if you check the is box, you also need that addendum. So that automatically incorporates that. All right, any concerns on the initials here? I'll take that as a note.
Oh, it's
yeah.
WBB instead
William
of
Robert.
BBB, right? W for
Yep.
William?
Is that a problem?
Yeah,
Now, if he signs that way every time.
That's the key. As long as it's consistent and that's the way he's gonna sign his loan docs and everything.
Yeah, I saw a picture of a guy who, when he got his driver's license, was being funny and just drew a cat's face as his signature. And so when he bought a house, he had to.
Oh, I think I did.
They made him do
Yeah,
that.
they made him do that.
Interesting. Huh. Interesting. All right, so we have spent 57 minutes on the first page. So this 2-hour class is now just, the rest will go a lot faster. All right, next. Couple things that I just want to point out to you is, and even though this isn't a section that you fill out, but is in section 3.2. And I don't know if Rob talked about this with you guys or not, but closing takes place after what has to happen in order for closing to have taken place?
Settlement.
Okay, well, settlement's part of it. What else?
Recording.
So they have to have done settlement, they have to have funded, so they have to have brought in any monies and
Recorded.
recorded. Okay, good. So just remember that those 3 things have to happen in order for closing to take place. Okay. All right, section 3.3. Any concerns there about possession? Take the lack of response as a no. Okay.
hours after.
Okay,
recording?
so here's the thing, there is no set thing on this as to what you should put in there. Meaning, well, for me, let me say this, if the property is vacant, I 100% of the time I'm gonna put upon recording. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that on the 20, is that 24 hours?
Yeah,
Is that considered like, let's say we close today by noon? And then it gets recorded by noon. So by noon the next day, or it has to be like at the end of the day, 5 PM.
Yeah, good question. So on the 24 hours, it is 24 hours from when, which is why I brought up the closing, is basically once it's recorded, it's 24 hours from when it was recorded. Versus if on calendar days, you would check the box and put 1, then when would they have to deliver possession?
5 PM.
5 PM. That's right. Good. So yeah, that's the difference. On number of hours after recording, the clock starts running right then. On number of days, we're gonna always go off of a 5 PM unless it specifies otherwise. So yeah, good question. So not a right answer necessarily on that, other than, I guess I would say, what are some of the things you guys are seeing as you're doing offers as to how many calendar days after recording people are putting?
Well, now people want.
45.
Yeah,
Whatever you need is the seller.
3 months.
Yeah.
Lease back.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of. them.
2024.
Yeah, 2024, I'll stay for
Yeah.
free.
Yeah, well, actually, I know of a house in my neighborhood that the buyer bought the house and is letting cash and is letting the seller stay in there about that long.
Wow.
Wow.
Had a free lease back on our Spanish Fork listing. They paid cash like 70K above asking and gave them like a free 3-week lease back.
Yeah, it's not uncommon now to be doing way longer of a time frame on that. So just kind of know that's gonna ebb and flow with the market.
And when we do lease back, should we just do possession way out until they want to leave, or should we have a lease back?
Yeah, good question. So it depends on who you're representing, I guess, to how much this would come into play, but my personal opinion is I would do something in writing that is the short-term lease back agreement, because that's gonna spell everything out. Yeah. All right, section 4. Any concerns there? 4.2.
There is no HOA in this community, but I always put no, or that the seller would pay any special assessments.
Okay, good. And that's smart. Here's why. So in section 4.2, it says any assessments for capital improvements as approved by the homeowners association pursuant to the HOA governing documents, or as assessed by a municipality or special improvement district prior to settlement.
Oh,
So
okay.
even though it's not, which that's why I always want to point this out, is because a lot of times that's what people will say, well, there's no way, it's not part of an HOA. But notice it also has, or as assessed by a municipality or a home or a special improvement district. So it is possible that there could be other assessments that come onto that
Yeah.
property. Not very often. So I had one of my nephews that I helped him buy a property that down in Orem, they had gone through and done Utopia for the internet. I think it was Utopia. I don't remember now. But they had done that, and the seller had an assessment on that property for that. And I had checked the box that the seller is responsible. So then at closing, they then tried to come back and say to my nephew, hey, you guys need to pay us for what's still outstanding, what we haven't paid on. And I said, no, we don't. Here's what the contract says. And so they ended up having to pay it to finish paying it off. So anyway, so it could be from something else. Pretty rare that would happen, but James, what you said is right on. I just always check the box for seller. Now, again, in today's market, if you're wanting to make it look stronger, you might want to say buyer. Because again, if it's not in an HOA, the chances of something coming up are pretty small. However, the buyer needs to understand this is a legally binding agreement, and if something does show up and you've checked buyer, they're responsible.
I had that happen last year.
Oh, did you?
They checked buyer, and when we bought the house, the transfer fee was only like $300.
Oh, yeah.
And so they checked that they would cover all transfer fees, and it changed from when we bought it to when they sold it. And now it was 0.5% of the purchase price. So
Mm.
they were out about $4,000.
Yeah.
Ouch.
That's her.
And it was home, so it was awesome.
I know, love it.
All right, let's see. So fees and costs, no, any concerns there with 4.3C? This would be the part where Douglas was just talking about, is the transfer fees and stuff. Okay, so yeah, same thing of this. I typically am just gonna put seller, but again, in our current market, to try to make your offer look stronger, you might end up saying, hey, the buyer will pay any of those type of things. But again, just make sure your buyer's aware of what they're agreeing to. All right, section 5.
Fire check mark.
Okay, good. Yeah, missed on there, the buyer's brokerage. And this used to be like one of the biggest things I would see all the time is that would get missed on checking the box.
Yeah.
I think though, it must have been something on the MLS that was creating the issue, because I don't really see it anymore. But it would happen over and over, and people would say, I swear I checked every one of the boxes, but, so I just always use this as the point to say, once you have gone through and gotten this filled out and signed, always do a run through, just glance through to look and make sure nothing got missed. Okay, because it's much easier to fix some of this stuff before you send it over to a seller than after. All right. Any other concerns on that page? Okay. Next page then. So again, I'm skipping through this. If you have questions specific, let's talk about them. On section 7, this other line, probably no concerns there, but just since we're talking about all the lines you would fill in, if there was something else you wanted disclosed or as part of the seller disclosure, you could write it in there. I'm not really sure what else it would be, but maybe if you were asking for the hot tub that they give you any warranty information on it or whatever, that might be an example of something you would put in here. All right, section 8.1, any concerns there? Okay, so here's what I would say in terms of that. Again, this is one of those things that with how competitive our market has been, that buyers are checking, or agents are having their buyers check the is not box and pursuing on. So if we check the is not box, does that mean we can't do an inspection?
No.
So what does it mean?
Well, it means if they canceling that on that deadline, that earnest money is not necessarily like non-refundable.
Okay, good. So yeah, so basically what it means is this, is your buyer still could do an inspection and probably I would say should do an inspection on the property. But if they check is not, what they're giving up their ability to cancel based upon that inspection. So by checking is not, you're just giving up your ability to cancel based on that and get your earnest money back versus if you're checking the is box. So again, if I look back over my career, almost always I'm going to check the is box. And even to some extent, even in today's market, like I would make sure that you're really explaining to your buyer, if they check the is not box, I would still tell them you should still do an inspection and still find out what's going on, and you understand that you're giving up your right to cancel based on that, and the earnest money, you won't get your earnest money back, and yada yada yada, whatever.
So in that section though, and this might be me getting too hypothetical, but at the bottom, it talks about how seller agrees to cooperate with buyer's due diligence. If you waive or say it's not conditioned upon due diligence, do they then not have to let you in to do an inspection if you want? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, so let me see. So let's
It's right
read
at the
it.
bottom of 8.18.
Yeah, but before we get to that though, we first have, so buyer's obligation to purchase is or is not conditioned upon buyer's due diligence as defined in this section 8.1A below. This condition is referred to as due diligence if checked in the affirmative. Sections 8.1A through 8.1 through 8.1C apply. Otherwise, they do not. So you're correct.
Seller
If you
could-
check no,
You're right.
you are
Seller
agreeing.
could say, no, you can't come in.
The seller could say, no, you're not.
You can't, well, you can come in, but you can't do any
Do
sort
an
of
inspection,
inspections, you
yeah.
can't look at more things.
Yeah, because it does say seller agrees to cooperate with buyer's due diligence.
So that really doesn't apply that they can get an inspection anyway.
They can try, but the seller doesn't have to let you in.
Yeah, so that is, so more so I would say, here's the good news is most agents are not trained as well as you guys are. And so you could check is not, and you're probably, they're still gonna let you. But it's good for you to know on the listing side, if they've checked is not, you could say, no,
Because it would be a dangerous world if all the sellers knew how much power they had. I think, like they can really kind of get away with a lot of things that they wanted to in certain
I mean, they
contracts.
already can.
well,
I mean, yeah, but
I was gonna say in
even more-
today's,
make it more complicated.
in today's market, that's true, but as a general rule, this contract is more in favor of the buyer. The seller doesn't have a whole lot that they can,
I mean, the
I mean,
seller
depending on-
is crazy to be difficult.
Yeah, but
They are.
Yeah.
Sellers are-
yeah, it still doesn't remove from the seller their obligation to disclose stuff
Yeah,
because they didn't do an inspection, so.
right, that's true.
Anyway, did I see another hand? Okay. All right, section 8.2, any concerns there?
Oh, I just have one.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because it was filled out incorrectly or anything, but in 8.2, especially in today's market, when they want to send in an appraisal addendum where they say it doesn't have to appraise for purchase price, but like a certain price underneath or whatever, would we then check that it's not conditioned on that and add the addendum? Or would it still be that it needs to at least appraise for that number in the addendum?
So,
So what box would you check if you had an appraisal addendum?
talking about like a appraisal guarantee.
well, yeah, so what he's talking about is, he's referring to, so there is an addendum that has been created, yeah, the appraisal saying that we will, it mostly puts a floor in, but it's saying we'll pay X amount, as long as it appraises for at least this, we'll pay X amount of dollars over whatever the appraised value is. So,
And that would be
So-
is.
You still have.
Still has to appraise.
Yeah, it still has to be that.
But the specific language is that appraising for not less than the purchase price.
so say that again.
So in this contract, it says, buyer's obligation to purchase the property is conditioned upon the property appraising for not less than the purchase price.
Correct.
Even though in the appraisal addendum, what appraisal they would still accept is below that purchase price.
Right, so, yeah, so if you use the addendum, any addendum is gonna override what this
Okay.
is.
Yeah, you would still be.
Because
is.
it's right, once you finish whatever you write, every addendum says, to the extent the
Yep.
terms of this addendum modify or conflict with any provisions of the REPC, this takes control.
Yeah, every addendum we have has that language at the end that just basically says whatever, if there's a conflict or a
This is-
modification, this would
is-
rule.
yes.
So, yep,
So you would want to still check, it is conditioned on an appraisal,
yes,
but essentially all it's changing is the verbiage of, hey, it can appraise.
Yeah.
less.
Not the purchase.
yeah,
price.
you're changing to
Yeah.
say,
Okay.
if it doesn't
And so
appraise for
I
the
think
purchase price,
You would just want to focus with whatever agent you're working with. On say, yes, it is contingent on an appraisal. However, we're doing an appraisal guarantee, so as long as it comes in there, as long as you frame it right and you're talking to them, I don't think.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
So that means like the appraisal addendum will override also the right to cancel. And if it comes below the floor value,
yes.
and then get the earnest money back.
Then they can cancel, right?
Well, I don't think the appraisal addendum says they get their
Right.
earnest money back, does it?
Right, that's what I'm saying, but if you check as.
Yeah, if you-
it's not,
If you checked is not, even if you use the appraisal addendum, you're not getting the earnest money.
if there's cancellation.
Correct. Okay. Next section is the 8.3, sorry, any concerns there? All right, so, go ahead.
It says additional $500 earnest money.
But it also says will not.
Yeah,
Well,
I think he meant to
well,
put it in.
we're not to 8, we're on
Oh, yeah.
8.3 still.
Oh,
So hold
okay,
on, we're not to
sorry.
8.4.
Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Yeah, you're good. So any concern, I know I scrolled right past it, then I realized I went back up. Section 8.3, any concerns there? So by checking 8.3B, we're saying they are getting a loan.
Yeah.
And then section 8.3BI says, in the event that we cancel after the due diligence, but before the finance and appraisal, how much of the earnest money are you willing to give up? And I put 0 in there.
0.
So it depends on who you represent. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, if I'm representing the buyer, that's great.
Yeah.
But if you're representing the seller, that's not so great, right?
Right.
especially in today's market again. So the point of this is when you're writing an offer with a buyer in today's market, you should have a conversation about them of how much of the earnest money would they be willing to give up as a way of getting the offer. And again, unfortunately, we are in a scenario where what you said, James, like the sellers have all the control in the world really today on offers. And so, but again, this is why tying it back to what I said at the very start, this is a legally binding agreement. So like, make sure your buyers understand what they're agreeing to. If they're giving,
Yeah.
if they're saying they'll give up the earnest money, make sure they know if you cancel after due diligence, but before finance and appraisal, that amount of the earnest money is going to be gone. So just make sure they're aware. Okay. All right, now 8.4, Joe. Now what you got?
Well, I was just looking at the 500 is non-refundable.
Yeah.
But it's not on the front page.
Yeah, so notice on this, it has 8.4 additional earnest money, will not deposit an additional $500. So I mean, technically, there's probably nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it
So,
doesn't.
It could be misleading.
yeah, it could be a
Yeah,
little bit misleading.
Your
So,
buyer would go away.
so anyway, I just threw that in there just to kind of just see if I could catch anybody. But yeah, if you are going to do an additional 500, what you're saying is right on. We should have checked the will box and then it should be listed as additional earnest
Yeah.
money on section 2. But in this one, if you check the will not, probably put 0 in there as well. Okay. All right, section 9. Any concerns there? Okay, good. So yeah, we checked that there are additional terms. We've got the FHABA checked, but not the addendum number and putting in the addendum number.
That one.
So, which is also the last page. So that section right there should have been checked and listed as well. So, good. So here's the point of that one is just make sure that if you have addendums that you're checking the R box. And so again, back to section 2, where we had said if they had a house that they had to sell first, then really it probably would be a good idea still to list it there, even though technically you wouldn't need to because it already incorporated it in. So anyway, either way it would work. I guess what I'm saying. All right, section 10, home warranty. Any concerns there? Okay.
Buyer
That's-
pays for it, right?
So typically, again, this is, as a general rule, this is the way I filled it out for most of my career. In the current environment, you probably wouldn't get away with asking the sellers much to pay for it, but
Yeah.
yeah, and the price too, yeah, it needs to be changed. So, good, okay. Any other questions on that page? All right, next page, section 15. Any concerns there? Section 15.
Yes or no?
Okay, so what do you think? Should we do shall or may?
Whichever one, right?
Okay, so when I first started training this years ago, we had an attorney that worked for our company. And that attorney said, you should check the may box every time. You should always do may because it just gives you options. Well, then he left the company and the company I was working for hired another attorney. And he came in and was sitting in on this class as I taught it. And I said, check the may box. And he's like, hold on, wait a minute. No, you should check shall every single time. So then I was like, okay. So then I taught the class and I'd be like, you should check shall every single time. And then he left and a new attorney came and I was teaching it and he goes, well, hold on. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, you should just explain to your client the difference between shall and may and let them decide. So that's the way I teach it now. So what's the difference between the shall and may? Meaning, and clearly I know you guys know what the difference between shall and may is, but in terms of explaining it to our client, how do we explain the difference between shall and may to the client?
You have to agree when you say may, like you have to come to the agreement of mediation
There's different options.
versus
Okay.
shall is saying you're gonna do that regardless.
Okay, good.
The mediation is just a step before they can actually take it to court.
That's right.
So, and that makes a whole lot of difference because if they agree to go through mediation, they don't have to automatically go and file
Yeah, good, perfect. Yeah, so if you check the shall box and you tried to go to court.
Right.
The court's gonna kick it back and say, you haven't done mediation and you said you were going to, so go do that first. If you check may, you could just go straight to court. So here's what I've found, and this is how go ahead, Steve.
Wow, that there's a cost associated with it too, that the buyer and seller have to share.
Perfect, yeah, good. So yeah, there's a cost with it. So let me explain that piece of it, because here's the challenge for me. Remember I said initially when I would train this, I always trained it as that you should check the shall box, right? Or excuse me, may box. The reason for that was typically the earnest monies people were doing was $250, $500, like it was always less than $1,000. Well, if you checked shall and the earnest money was $500 and you end up going to mediation, pretty much the earnest money's gone. Yeah, you've lost it in paying for the mediation. And so that was a lot of times why I said to do it as may, because then you could kind of decide. So here's what it boils down to, and here's how I explain it to a client. Most of the disputes that happen over a real estate purchase contract are over the earnest money. Most of the time, that's what the dispute's going to be. And if that is the case, you'll probably wish you had checked the may box. Because again, depending on how much you've done as earnest money, again, even if somebody only did 1,000 or 2,000, a lot of that could get eaten up in mediation. So I usually will explain it to them is most of the disputes that happen are over earnest money, and you will wish you had done may. But in the event that it's a dispute that's not the earnest money, it's something potentially bigger than that, you may end up wishing you had done shall. Because see, here's the problem is a lot of times the clients are going to look to you of, well, I don't know what to do there. What should I do?
Yeah.
This is a gray area where it's kind of hard to kind of tell or advise someone on what to do because it's a legal steps they will have to do or not.
Yeah, it's very difficult to decide what to tell them to do because of the consequences of it. But here's the challenge for me. So let's forget our client for a minute. If I was just filling this out for me, I'm going to look at this when I get to this section and be like, okay, what am I going to do here? Shall or may? Well, here's the challenge for me is again, like I said, if it ends up being what most disputes are, I'm going to probably wish I had put may. But if it's something bigger than that, I may end up wishing I had done shall on it. So I guess for me personally, I probably still am going to err on the side of just doing may, but I'm going to make sure explaining it to the client of there may be scenarios that you'll wish you had done shall. So it's really kind of up to them, but just make sure you're explaining to them what the difference is. Shall is you have to go to mediation first, and probably the earnest money part of it is going to get eaten up in that cost. May, you don't have to do that, so it's up to you to decide if you want to or not.
So one person, if you put may, and they both agree, but one person says they want to go to mediation, the other person says no, would it just go straight to court?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because the mays,
That's the cut, yeah.
I don't agree. So, but shall, you have to. All right. Any other concerns on this page?
No, check initial.
No initials. Okay, good. So which again, that's back to before you submit this offer, always scan through to make sure. Because again, even using .loop or a DocuSign, if you forgot to drop one in there or whatever happened, it doesn't end up being there. Just, it's always better to just check. Saves you some time. All right, last page, well, of the REPC, then we'll get to the other evidence. Section 24, any concerns there? Okay, so let's talk about it for a minute. Because this one is an area, I'm going to give you how I like to do it. Doesn't mean that it's right, okay? But I'm going to just explain to you guys how I do it, and you can decide. And here's how most people train it. Most people train it as 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, 28. That's typically the way I've seen most people train the contract is put this to be the seller disclosure to be 7 days out, due diligence to be 14, finance and appraisal is 21, and then your settlement deadline 28. It's easy to remember. then that's fine. If you want to do it that way, do it that way. Here's how I do it though. For me, I typically on my seller disclosure deadline, I'm gonna put it 3 to 5 days out. And the way I'm deciding between 3 or 5 is if it's a pretty straightforward offer that I feel like we're gonna get it accepted pretty easily, I'm probably gonna err on the side of 3. If I think there's a chance we may be countering back and forth, I'll probably put 5 days from the date that I'm filling this out as the deadline. On due diligence, I usually do 10 to 14 days, same concept there of if I feel like it's pretty straightforward, we're gonna be able to get it accepted. The other thing I will look at is depending on the day, like to some extent for me, I fill this contract out a little bit selfishly. And what I mean by that is like, I don't want my due diligence deadline falling on a day that I don't play. Yeah, if it's a Sunday and I'm not working Sunday,
Yeah.
I don't want it to fall on that day because I don't want to have to deal with it on that day.
Yeah.
So to some extent, when I say 10 to 14 is, I'm considering holidays and all that kind of stuff. So I'll look at that to see, okay, what day kind of makes sense of that. So I usually will do 10 to 14 days on that. Finance and appraisal deadline. So for me, I always look at it. Now, again, this is based on our current market. This may not always work out the way I'm saying it right now, but for me, I typically, when I get to this section, and actually let's back up. And I probably should have brought this up before. When I get here to section 3.3, I think it was 3.3. On possession, when I get to the possession section, I always am gonna ask my buyer, when do you wanna move in? So part of how I'm gonna decide what to put on possession is when do you want to move into the property? Then from there, I'm gonna structure section 24 based upon that. So section 24, then, when I get down here to finance and appraisal deadline, I'm first gonna figure out when my settlement deadline is going to be. So if they want to move in on Saturday, I typically am gonna do my settlement deadline to be the Monday or the Tuesday before. And I like doing it the Monday or the Tuesday because then it gives you time if there were issues before funding and recording before the end of the week, okay? So I typically am gonna do something along the lines of that. Well, so now with that said, let's say that this is November 14th is the Tuesday or whatever. What does the lender have to do as far as disclosures before they can go to closing? How many days?
3 days.
And do Saturdays and Sundays count and holidays?
Saturday counts, but Sunday doesn't.
Okay, good. So Saturdays count, Sundays don't count. So basically, here's how I would say I look at it. I always take whatever my settlement deadline is, and I like to put my finance and appraisal deadline to be whatever that 3 days before is. So I just back up on the calendar, excluding the Sunday. What is day 3 before that? Because if the lender does not send out those disclosures, you're not going to be able to close to do settlement on that date. So for me, I want to protect their earnest money as long as I can. So I put that as the deadline so that and then on that date or a couple days before, I'm talking to the lender saying, have you sent out the disclosure? Have you sent out the disclosure? Because for me, once they've sent out the disclosure, I feel pretty comfortable that it's going to close. But if they haven't sent it out, there's a problem. Because they should have sent it out. So I want to be aware of it. So that's how I typically like to fill this out. But again, you do have to keep in mind the current environment, and it's more of a seller's market than a buyer's. And so you have to be a little more careful with that, meaning that a seller may not go for giving you that long on your finance and appraisal deadline. So, okay, good. Any other questions, section 24? All right, section 25 then. Any concerns there?
Well, his signature,
Okay, what about it?
does it say W again?
Yeah, so again, as long as that's
It's
consistent, we're
he's
good. Yep. No concerns on section 25? Okay, well, let me just say this though. For me, and again, this varies based on what's going on in the market today. But as a general rule, I want to call the listing agent and ask, do you have any other offers? And I'm sending you an offer. When can you get me a response? Okay. So I like to call and find out when they can get me an answer, because what you don't want to do is give them too much time. And let me tell you what I mean by that. And again, I know the current market, maybe it's a little different, but as a listing agent, if I ever got an offer, so James, let's say you sent me an offer.
Okay.
And I got it, and you gave me until tomorrow at 10 o'clock or whatever to respond. I'm gonna be on this phone calling Trey. Hey, Trey, you showed the house. Did your buyers have any interest in the property? They do? Okay, well, let them know I got an offer. And if they're interested, they better get me an offer. I have to respond by 10 o'clock tomorrow. See what you can do.
Will do.
And then I'm gonna, hey, Bowen, you showed the house yesterday. Did your buyers have any interest in the property?
Yep.
If they do, I've got an offer already, and I'm gonna go out and see what I can do to generate multiple offers so that I can try to drive that price up for my seller. Now, like I said, in our current environment, you don't necessarily have to do that because you're probably already getting all the offers, or you're doing like a lot of people have just, this is when we're gonna accept our offers, so send us. But just, I always want to call and ask. So let's change it a little. So if James called me and said, hey, Russ, I got an offer I'm going to be sending over. How quick can you get me an answer? And if I said, well, my seller will be home at 5 o'clock tonight, I could probably get it to you by 8 o'clock tonight, then I'm not giving them until tomorrow sometime. I want an answer then tonight. Does that make sense? So that's how I try to work the offer in time for acceptance. But again, like I said, a lot of times today, the sellers are just telling you when, here's when you can send me an offer.
I've had situations where sellers, where they don't get back to you in the time, but they still accept it after.
Great
How does
question.
that, work?
Yeah, great question. So what his question was, it is, I sent it over and it said 8 o'clock or whatever. Is that what I put on there? Yeah, 8 PM, but they don't sign it until 9 o'clock, or the next day they sign it and send it back to me. So what has happened then to this offer? What happens to this offer at 8 o'clock? 8:01.
It expires.
It lapses. So if they have until that time, and then the offer will lapse and the brokerage gives the earnest money back to the buyer. So if they have done that, then I would need to then send back a counter or an addendum, basically saying the offer in time for acceptance was extended until they had signed it. That way, there's no ambiguity as to if it was accepted or not. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Now, but what if you countered me though? What if he sent over a counter off? They didn't accept it. They sent over a counter offer, but he sent the counter offer after the 8 PM.
As long, I mean, if.
There's a
if
new
as long
timeline.
as The other side agrees to it, and, everything goes back to track.
Yeah, because that's a new offer. so-
Yeah, good. So the thing to keep in mind is as soon as you hit the counter offer box right here and put in addendum, whatever, essentially you've sent back a new offer. So we wouldn't need to extend the offer in time for acceptance in that scenario, because if then so the seller sends back the counter offer, but they did it after 8 o'clock. So therefore, they're now giving to the buyer to respond by 8 o'clock the next day. If the buyer then accepts that, by them accepting that counter offer, they've also by default extended this. Does that make sense?
I have just a quick kind of random question that popped in my head.
Yeah.
So if they accept an offer, let's say that they waive their due diligence, their earnest money and everything, but let's say the third day comes in that contract and they still have not submitted earnest money, but they want to back out. Do they have to still abide by that and just give the sellers whatever amount of earnest money because they?
Well, so I
just
guess,
keep it and not,
so it depends on if they have if they had done the due diligence timeframe and said that they have the right to do an inspection. Is that what you're asking? Is could the buyer then, if the buyer 3 days later just said, they haven't given the earnest money,
They haven't given earnest money.
but we now don't want to buy the property.
Yes, but they've waived everything. Let's say that they've waived.
Then-
their due-
Yo, okay, so they've waived everything,
Yeah, they cannot just.
then they still owe the money. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They haven't given it, they still owe it.
Mm.
All right, next, the FHABA addendum. Any concerns up here with which, let me point out to you, This is an addendum to the real estate purchase contract with an offer reference date of, and so that ties it back to that first date.
Yeah.
Right? Any other concerns with anything on this top part?
The address.
Okay, good.
is
The address
complete.
is not there. Good. Buyer does or does not intend. Any concerns on section 3, 4, 5? Good. Any concerns on the second page? All right, the last addendum here, addendum 1. Any concerns on the top part up here? So the address again, good. Any concerns with section 1?
Shouldn't this be addendum number 2?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So the challenge
Oh,
with this,
is that
The
FHA?
back office would say that this, the way this is structured, that should be addendum 2.
or this one could be, but
Right. But where they have it listed in that order, this should be 2.
yeah, so the challenge is they're both listed and the one doesn't have a spot for it, so it is cleaner. The cleanest way to do
Right,
this
would have been this first, then that.
would be this, well, either way would be to have a number on this. Right.
Yeah,
I mean, if you print it off and flip papers, it's in order. So there's nothing technically I think they can do about it.
Yeah,
That's what you think.
I was gonna say,
I was
The hard
gonna
part
say,
is-
that's why I'm bringing it
the hard
up.
part is if you want to get your check,
Yeah.
you're gonna
make
have to.
sure you do it right now.
Yeah. So yeah, technically probably should be marked as addendum number 2 and the other one should be listed as addendum number 1, so, or vice versa, either way.
Notification from Morgan Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think it's right. until-
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't the FHA addendums typically have a spot to put addendum 1 or 2?
Yeah, they do now, I think, don't they? I
But in
think,
2017, when he made.
yeah,
this,
when I made this, they didn't, but I
Right.
think they do now have a spot for it, so. So yeah, just make sure you have them numbered. All right. Any concerns with the written part in section 1 there?
No signature.
Okay, good. So they didn't sign. What about the seller to have the carpets professionally cleaned to remove the stinky, nasty?
Oh, yeah.
Or, yeah.
Looks good. Get what you want.
Feels a little bit extra, I think is what they say.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
probably,
nasty smell, I mean,
probably not a good
Definitely
idea.
no.
Multiple offers.
Yeah,
just get the carpets clean.
yeah. So to me, just cut it off at professionally cleaned.
Yeah, don't be.
At a, with a company approved by the buyer or something
Yeah,
like that.
nasty.
So yeah, probably not a good idea to offend. So I gotta give you a quick funny story though on this. I had it, so I was with a different company running their training program. And as part of it, when you were in the new training program up there, you were still considered part of the new agent training program until you had closed 6 transactions. And I had an agent who had not had 6 transactions, and I would, at that company, I reviewed every single contract that any of the new agents did. And so I'm sitting there flipping through, reviewing them, and they get to the one that this guy, he was up in Park City. I get to it and he had written in there that, so to graduate the training program, you had to go to all the classes and get 6 closings. So he had written in there though, buyer and seller agree, this transaction will graduate, and then he put his name in there from the training program.
Oh.
And they signed it. So I was like, well, I guess he graduated because this is a legally binding agreement, right? No. So the reason I tell you that story though is the point of it is make sure that whatever's written in there is relevant and make sure it makes sense. Like, I wonder what the seller thought when they got that to say that it would graduate him from our training program. Like, that has nothing to do with anything. So here's what I would say. Anytime you're putting something in there, have someone else read it because it makes sense to you. When you write something like that, it makes sense to you. But somebody else might read it and say, I'm not sure I understand what you're saying in there. So make sure that it makes sense to somebody else who isn't part of the transaction, meaning, because if it ended up in court, they're going to use that as like, well, it's not very clear and I don't understand what it says. So make sure that that's clear. Okay. Now, so just another funny piece to that story. This same agent years later, so he ended up getting out of real estate, going and moved somewhere else. We get a phone call at the office one day from a homeowner that's livid and says, one of your agents just knocked on my door and said that he was the listing agent when the when we bought the house, and he just was in town and wondered if he could take a shower at our house.
Oh.
And we were like, okay, well, we're sorry that happened, but he's not an agent with us anymore. And like, he was just
Showering
weird.
People's houses.
What?
He's not an agent here because he kept going. to-
Yeah, because he kept wanting to shower, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, it was just kind of weird because I'm like, who does that? And like, just knocks, hey, can I take a shower? I'm just in town.
yay.
I was the listing agent. Can I take a shower? This is just weird. Anyway, make sure it makes sense. All right, any other concerns on this?
It is a different time than.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I
it's
was
an
just gonna
hour
say,
later.
That's
So
not
on-
necessarily an issue.
On this one, it says that they have until 9 PM instead of 8 PM.
Yeah,
It's just weird. It's not. like
another
it's
hour, doesn't
contractually
make
wrong.
sense.
They needed that hour to read the final addendum.
To interpret it. So here's the question then for you. Do they have until 8 or do they have until 9?
9.
And why?
Because of the
that
addendum.
Supersedes anything else. that's-
Okay, good. So this would come back to again, why it would probably be important for those to be numbered, a 1 and a 2 versus a 2. Because if this one is no, in fact, number 1 and the FHAVA is number 2, then what time do they have to respond by?
It's 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. If this one is, if that one was 1 and this one's 2 and it says 9, now this one, whatever is on this one supersedes any of the others. Make sense?
So Russ, in this case, where the FHA then doesn't have a number for it, it will be automatically assumed since this is the number 1, that one is number 2, so the time will be 8 o'clock.
Yeah, so I don't know that there's a right answer for that. I don't know which one is the FHA considered number 2? I don't know.
Well, this one is clear, it says number 1.
Right.
Unless there's more addendums to that.
Yeah, but logically you'd go, oh, I'm looking at this is
So
1.
this is 1,
this
so
is 2.
FHA will be number 2.
Now you know why we want them numbered and they now
Yeah.
created it to have
Don't
an FHA.
assume
Because
anything.
the problem is for years and years, that's how we had it. And it was kind of like, well, is it number 2 or is it number 3 or is it, whatever. So,
Right.
yeah, just make sure you have them numbered and then whichever one is latest is going to be the one that controls. All right, good. Any other questions? All right, well, we are done for the day. So, okay, Thursday is, I don't know what class. I've been gone too long. Thursday is buyer packet. So we'll do kind of the same type of a thing that you did with Jason last week on the seller packet. We'll do that with the buyer on Thursday at 10 o'clock. So anyway, thanks for being here.
You, thanks, Russ.
Yep.
Thanks, Russ.
For those of us who couldn't get onto the.
Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Russ.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Is there a way to get that recorded?
So I can get you the recording on it. The challenge is I can't give you credit for a recording.
That's fine.